by so many of us, students and his colleagues, Harold is known and respected as a knowledgeable and committed teacher and outstanding researcher. Today he's going to talk to us about how the National Park Service UW Research Station in Teton National Park has helped bridge the gap between science, wildlife management, and the public since 1953. So, Harold.
Thanks, Maggie. You're too kind. Thanks particularly for inviting me when it's here at Spear-O-Wigwam, which I've been trying to come to for several years. So it finally gave me not only an excuse, but an important reason to be here and to meet Trudy and the rest of the crew. Trudy is actually going to come over to the research station in Grand Teton National Park next week, and we're going to compare notes and try to figure out how we can work together more and how we can shuttle the courses that come from Nebraska to Grand Teton to stop here on their way back or on their way to, things like that. So it's good to be at Spear-O-Wigwam and to learn more about what you do here and your wonderful facilities. It's such a beautiful place. I want to come back with my backpack and fishing rod and
all the tutoring I can get.
Well, no, I was going to go off in the woods and go fishing and have fun. I'm kind of an interloper here. I'm not going to be lecturing about anything that I know about, really. Well, I do know a bit about this, but I have only been director of the UW National Park Service Research Station in Grand Teton National Park for now my second year, and I'm kind of doing it on my way to retirement. I was department head in the zoology department. Great colleagues, but being department head, as Maggie and others will tell you, is a horrible job. And when my colleague and good friend Hank Harlow, who had been director at the station for 21 years, decided to retire, and I was department head, I had rank. And so when he decided he was going to retire, I'm going to say, somebody else be department head. I'm going to take over Hank's job. That sounds much better. And I think you'll see that, for instance, this is the view from the front of the director's cabin. So, so it's a very, very wonderful place in a lot of ways, including the view. So Hank Harlow should be here, but he's retired, and he's off having fun somewhere, and I'm going to tell you about this. So I'm not going to lecture about the things that I've been doing for the last 40 years, just the last 2 years. And understanding the use of research in the national parks and in nature out in Wyoming, and the importance of that for application to existing issues in the greater Yellowstone area especially. So most of you know, of course, Grand Teton National Park and Yellowstone National Parks are both in the core center areas of the what is called the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, or the Greater Yellowstone area, mapped here. And the parks are an integral part of it, all protected landscapes that are really important. And the University of Wyoming's National Park Service Research Center is right on Jackson Lake in the middle of Grand Teton National Park, one of the most beautiful places on the planet, along with Cloud Peak Wilderness and the mountains around us here. So the University of Wyoming has been in Grand Teton National Park in the greater Yellowstone area in an important way in supporting research and doing research for a long, long time, more than 60 years. Really, the university started out participating in and back when I was a mere baby, in 1946, the Jackson Hole Preserve and Wildlife Park was established by Lawrence Rockefeller and the New York Zoological Society, which Lawrence Rockefeller was a prominent member of. But they had members of the University of Wyoming faculty on their board and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department on their board. And they had trouble managing this preserve and turned it over to the management of the University of Wyoming in 1953. So the University of Wyoming has operated a research station in the park up there on near Jackson Lake since 1953. In 1976, from 53 to 76, it was located near the Oxbow, if you know that area, in Grand Teton National Park, the Snake River below the Jackson Lake Dam goes through that Oxbow that you drive by on the highway. That's where the wildlife park was located and where the first, since 1953, University of Wyoming management of the research station took place. In 1975, the Park Service acquired an in-holding inside the park that had been homesteaded in 1890 by a crazy guy by the name of John Sargent, and to which Sargent Bay is now named, for which John Sargent's name is inscribed around the place. And then he owned it for a couple of decades till he committed suicide in the middle of a really bad winter, a little bit of cabin fever maybe. That probably happened a bit in Wyoming in the really remote areas of the state. And then several owners that were rich, Eastern wealth came in and started using these kinds of places as summer retreats and summer homes. And so the Johnsons and then the Barrels owned this property for a number of years. And the Barrels, who were famous for their business all over the world in manufacturing pencils. And there are many features in the building that are like these logs or the log accoutrements around a building like this. They shave the ends of the logs like you would shave a pencil with a jackknife. So the important barrel buildings built by the Barrels on the property all have these cut pencil ends. But they made their millions building or in the stationery business, and they were famous for the Barrel pencil line, which now has been purchased and is, I think, Ticonderoga pencils. But they owned the property for over 40 years and developed the property by adding more buildings, including the very famous, you'll see pictures, Barrel Lodge, which is just a gorgeous building, not unlike this one. And they, after 40 years there, when Mr. Barrel died, the heirs sold the property to the Park Service, so the Park Service absorbing this, what was an in-holding, into the main Grand Teton National Park. And when that happened, they invited in 1976 the university to move its research station operation from Snake River near the Oxbow to this site right on the shore of Jackson Lake. So we have 14 buildings that are used for housing of researchers, meeting spaces, conferences, labs, and all of these buildings but one are on the historic register, are on the Register of Historic Places. Now, the objective of operating a research center in a national park in an important greater Yellowstone area, which is very, very important to understanding nature in all of its contexts, has been written about by the National Research Council and National Academy of Sciences. There are a whole series of reports that really talk about the value of these sorts of research stations and the importance of research in a place like this and the UW-NPS Research Station to determine what resources are there and how to protect, manage, and detect change over decades, long periods, to understand the natural dynamics and processes of populations and ecosystems, the biological things that are going on, assess effects of specific threats, and evaluate and devise management responses. So all of these survey reports that have been written by different important bodies all talk about the importance of these research stations maintaining a record of what we have. sometimes before they're lost, but hopefully to help preserve them as well. So our mission at the University of Wyoming National Park Service Research Station is to provide, it's very simple, provide research support for national park and forest managers in the greater Yellowstone area. The people that work for the U.S. Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management or the National Park Service in managing Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks and other places like that, their work is just managing what they have. And so doing the basic fundamental research to learn about things that are under threat or things that we need to worry about, things that we want to understand, things to be able to gather information, to be able to translate it for the public. You don't have time for that. They're like living, it takes them all winter to recover from the blast of activity that's associated with the millions of people that visit these parks. So they don't have time for a focused kind of research activity, and that's what we provide for them in the greater Yellowstone area, and especially for Grand Teton National Park. The kinds of things that we provide are housing for up to 60 researchers and, 60 people that might be in field classes for geology or ecology or the arts even, and researchers that come to the park and the greater Yellowstone area to investigate all manner of things, whether it is biological science or physical science like geology, or whether it's understanding why people come to the park. And I'll have some examples of this, what they learn, what the public learns, what the public values about the park, so human dimensions of this great ecosystem. We have a grants program that's based on park priorities between Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. What are the priorities for research? What are they concerned about that they need to know about? So we set some priorities each year. We sponsor several internships. We've had 3 up there all summer, this summer. We have laboratories and equipment. We have an official branch of the University of Wyoming Library that has especially resources related to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So everything like practical trail guides to bird and mammal and invertebrate identification guides, treatises on the geology of this region of the country. So a lot of resources there for the researchers and classes to be able to use. We also have internet, which is very slow, but we're trying to boost it up. We just completed a survey of researchers that have come to the station over the last couple of decades, and they love the place in all of the things that we do for the researchers that come there. But they complain bitterly about how slow the internet is. So we're going to try to fix that. Everybody gets used to really fast service back in the main cities we all live in, or even small cities. But you go, to the edge of Jackson Lake or to Spear-O-Wigwam in the middle of the cloud, next to the Cloud Peak Wilderness, and it's a little different, and people are spoiled by the fast service they have elsewhere. We have field course student housing for field courses and facilities for kind of classroom space for conferences and workshops. We have a weekly seminar series in the summer that's open to the public. We publish an annual report that now is housed electronically in the University of Wyoming library system that you can search by author all the way back to 1954, or you can search by brown trout, or search by key biological or geologic terms, the Teton Fault. You could search and find all of the reports and studies that have dealt with understanding the Teton Fault. the important thing is that there's a lot of activity all the way from mid-May into October, with as many as last year. This is all of our activities from last year, and I'll just highlight some of them. 9 classes, field classes on ecology, geology, human dimensions, social science, all from several Wyoming community colleges, not Sheridan, but maybe someday. Maybe we can swap or something like that. But also from all over the country. This last year, Missouri, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Utah. This year we've had several Nebraska groups. We've had another Texas group, a different Texas group, two different Pennsylvania groups. So we get, last year we had 9 with anywhere from 5 to 20 students in each group. So a lot of activity there, with groups coming for as many as from 2 days to 15 days. So it's a mix of groups coming in and going all the time. Workshops and meetings, we've had 5 last year, 1 on bear management. So we had all of the bear biologists in the greater Yellowstone area that work for the Forest Service, the BLM, the Park Service, all come to the station for 4 days to, at the beginning of the season, to get their act together and kind of coordinate amongst agencies how they were going to handle grizzly bear management. And every single one of these 40 people that came drove their own big testosterone truck in. These grizzly bear biologists, you can imagine, some of them are small women, some are huge guys, but they all drive these big testosterone trucks because they got to haul around grizzlies, I guess. It's kind of crazy. And we had last year 22 different research teams, from 2 to 6 researchers in each team, and they stayed from anywhere from 2 days to 2 months. So as a consequence of all this activity, and then 2 interns last year, we had more this year, and then once every Thursday afternoon, we have a $5, we ask for a $5 donation for a barbecue dinner. With this year, we're getting local beef for the burgers, locally prepared veggie burgers from Signal Mountain Lodge, and a couple of side dishes for a $5 donation. It's got to be the cheapest meal between Bozeman and Rock Springs. And I think 10% of the people that come for the $5 meal, but we force them all to go in and listen to the seminar, even if they've just come in for the cheap meal. As a consequence of all of these people coming and going all of the time, and Trudy, this is what I refer to as my Rubik's Cube of housing assignments. It's impossible trying to figure out, when people are logging in and going. And so basically, for the month of July, every bunk was filled. And these are all different bedrooms in different buildings. And some of them have 6 bunks, some of them have 4 bunks, some of them have 2 bunks, some of them have 1 bunk. And some of them have bathrooms, some of them don't have bathrooms. It's not like the Holiday Inn, which has a room, room 101 and 102 and 103, and they all have 2 beds and they all have 1 bathroom. It's not like that at all. So juggling these groups, so about a third of the job is being a hotel manager, and about a third of the job is just keeping all of the plumbing and everything working. So it's kind of crazy, but it's fun. It's fun. And Trudy's going to come over and we're going to compare notes. We have already, but she is going to come over for a visit, and we're going to see all of this in action and see how it works for us and what they might learn from us and what we might learn from Spear-O-Wigwam. So housing. One thing that's different here at Spear-O-Wigwam versus what we provide at the research station on Jackson Lake is we don't provide any bedding. Here they've got really nice bedrooms. It was a dude ranch, So they've got all those sorts of facilities. We've got researchers that want the cheapest possible rate because their grants can only afford very, very low rates. So if we had to provide bedding, it would just increase the number of staff we would have to have and how much work that it would take. I mean, they're beautiful buildings, but you see these bunks just have a mattress and a mattress pad. We changed the mattress pad between groups. So if somebody's got cooties, we at least are avoiding that problem and transmitting it to other people. We also don't provide food service. All of the researchers or the classes are responsible for preparing their own food. We have, I think, 6 kitchens, and everybody gets 1 or 2 refrigerators, just depending on how big their group is, and they prepare their own. And we have to operate that way because some of the research groups are there leaving the research station every morning at 4 in the morning to go out to do their bird surveys. If we had to get a crew up to prepare breakfast for everybody, we'd have to have breakfast served from midnight till noon, and lunch served from noon to 5, and dinner served from 5 to midnight. We'd have to have a full-time kitchen staff on, so we just let them do their own, which makes it a less expensive charge to each of the research teams when they come in. So our charge rates are very, very reasonable as a consequence of providing a minimum level of service and let the researchers and the classes take care of the food and their own bedding. Most people just bring a sleeping bag and a pillow and throw it on the bed, and that works. We have lab equipment and laboratories with expensive, researchers these days, some of them are using very inexpensive methods and have very inexpensive ways in which they can do their work. But in the computer age and the analytical age, when people need very, very detailed information, it takes a lot of very expensive equipment. It costs thousands of dollars for some of the major equipment that we have to have, including things like a research vessel to use on Jackson Lake, 29-foot research vessel. It's very expensive to maintain. We also have, as I said, a library, University of Wyoming branch library, where we have internet. Rather than providing Wi-Fi boosters all over the station, we only have Wi-Fi in one end of the Barrel Lodge in the library. And I thought, well, we should spread it all over the campus. But then after thinking about it, and it's many acres, about 50 acres to boost Wi-Fi all over the place, but we could do that. The technology's there. But the wonderful thing about this place is that every afternoon, evening, sometimes early mornings, the place is operating 24 hours a day. If people want to check their email or download some data or upload some data, everybody has to go to the library. So I got the geologists talking to the biologists, and the biologists talking to the artists and the social scientists. And it creates a community. It clusters around the available Wi-Fi. So if I were to spread it all over campus, they'd sit in their cabins all night working on things and never interact. So we're not spreading Wi-Fi any broader than just the library. You might think about that here.
Good idea.
Yeah. Field courses and educational outreach. Now, as I said, we had 9 classes last year. I think this year we had 12 from all over the country. Some of these groups drive all the way from Penn State or all the way from Southeastern State Missouri College or all the way from Southern Texas, from the University of Texas branch campuses. So we have everything from high school. We don't have that many, but we almost every year have a high school group. This year we had a high school biology class from one of the St. Louis suburbs come and study crickets and the mating behavior of Mormon crickets. And they went out to their research sites at about 8 in the evening and didn't get back till 2 a.m. because they were observing the mating behavior of Mormon crickets. And that happens at night. So we can't provide, they're gone for dinner, so we can't, so we let them take care of their own. So we do have some high school groups, but mostly these are field geology, field biology, or field social science classes that are interacting with the visitor centers, or biology, doing all manner of biology, as you'll see, covering all kinds of different things, including art. So every year for about the last 15 years, early in the season, the University of Wyoming Department of Art has had an outdoor art studio class up at the research station. And one of the places that 3 or 4 or 5 of the students will set up is in our boathouse. They come early in the season, so it tends to be late May. Sometimes it's rainy and windy and blustery. Sometimes the ice isn't melted off the lake. So we give them the boathouse. So they set up on the boathouse on the dock at the station. And if the weather is good, they move out onto the dock. If it's bad, they back up into the boathouse. So Patrick Kekut now teaches this class. Ricky Klages, the art department head, started the class about 15 years ago, and they're doing it every year. And through all the years that Hank was director, he went on, and I did the same in the last 2 years. On Thursday evenings, we'd have a wine and cheese party and an art showing, and the students on the last night they were there would show their stuff. And some of our other biology and geology and other kind of researchers would buy their stuff. So, so it was a good market right there. This last year, their last night was on one of our seminar nights, and so about 130 seminar attenders all went out and looked at their stuff on the picnic tables outside. And I think they sold all their art from this last year's class. We also have especially geology and ecology field courses especially coming and going through the course of the summer. And sometimes they're very, very large groups of maybe 20 people. Sometimes they're relatively small, 5 or 6 people and an instructor, sometimes coming from very long distances. It's sometimes coming from the Wyoming community colleges or the University of Wyoming. Conferences and workshops. This is a view from the middle of the great room in the Barrel Lodge. So it's pretty tough. It's kind of sometimes workshops where the organizer of the workshop or conference is trying to keep everybody focused on the topic, they close the drapes because everybody's staring out the window. One of the most, we have 5 or 6 of these. This next several weeks, we have all of the directors and their top managers and a commissioner or two from the Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana game and fish agencies all meeting, about 30 people meeting at the AMK to kind of coordinate their activities across Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming in the management of game and fish. So it's an important meeting in that regard. Also, in a week and a half, we have the top leaders in the Greater Yellowstone Coordinating Council. That's the superintendent of Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, the forest supervisors for all 7 of the national forests that cluster around the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So they're coming there for a 1.5-day meeting and bringing their sleeping bags and having to throw them on a bunk, and they tolerate that. We don't have to make a bed for them. These are people that kind of started their careers, as a grunt in a seasonal job. They know, so they're hearkening back to the earlier years in their career. So these sorts of meetings are really important service to the area in the management of things in the greater Yellowstone area. One, maybe the most famous but the least heard about conference or meeting that occurred in this room, looking out that window, was in 1989 in September, just 26 years ago next month. James Baker III was the U.S. Secretary of State. Edward Shevardnadze was the Foreign Secretary for the Soviet Union. So all of those of you who are, my age or younger, but not the youngsters in the back row over there. In 1989, you'll recall Reagan was president. Reagan kept spending more on defense, Star Wars and things, and eventually, this is my cute biological interpretation of what happened. The Soviet Union said, "Uncle, we can't keep up with that kind of spending." And there started negotiations between Baker and Shevardnadze to kind of ramp down the Cold War, spend less on armaments, fewer nuclear bombs. And they had several meetings around the world, one in Iceland, one somewhere else. But the concluding meeting where agreements were signed was in Jackson Hole. And all of their committees and entourages and bodyguards and everybody stayed at the Jackson Lake Lodge, which is just a few miles away from us. But Baker and Shevardnadze, the two of them, with just a couple of aides, met in this room at the Barrel Lodge at our research station. They evicted all of the researchers. They had to go to campgrounds. And the Secret Service took over the whole place, allowed one University of Wyoming employee to stay there in case the plumbing got messed up or something. And they met in this room for 3 days. And James Baker is quoted as having said, "One of the reasons we were able to conclude the agreement was affected, no doubt, by the scenic beauty and the comfortable surroundings and setting of the Barrel Lodge overlooking Jackson Lake and the sweep of the Tetons." It's an inspiring place.
Did they bring their own sleeping bags?
No, they slept in fancy quarters each night back at Jackson Lake Lodge, but they were there each day during that time. So our seminars, we had 10 last year. They're listed here, and you can see they cover topics everywhere from global warming to polar bears, fish, natural history, storytelling, all kinds of different odd topics that all relate to the surroundings that we live in up there. So another picture of the Barrel Lodge great room from just looking at one corner. And we get from 80 generally to 200 people attending for the $5 barbecue and the seminar. If it happens to be about the Yellowstone supervolcano or the Teton Fault in geology, or about charismatic megafauna like mountain lions or grizzly bears, we'll get closer to 200. If it's about some odd, quirky little thing that some people are very interested in, like the snake lecture that you went to, Margie, or Maggie, we might get 80 or 70. If it's air quality or water quality or environmental policy, we'll get 50. So it kind of depends on the topic, what the draw is, and it depends on the weather. If it looks like bad weather, people don't want to drive up from Jackson or down from Flag Ranch or over from Du Bois, but we get people from all that region that come to these seminars. It's one of the more visible University of Wyoming outreach activities in Teton County all year. I mean, we draw, hundreds and hundreds of people through the course of the summer to these events. And they come because they can get a $5 burger and potato salad and have this view and then learn something. So it's great fun. Research projects since 1976, mostly basic and applied projects, including biological, physical, social, and cultural resource research that are reviewed, evaluated, and selected from amongst proposals that are submitted to us each winter. Over 600 projects since 76, jointly funded by the National Park Service, which CHIP and the University of Wyoming Research Office matches every Park Service dollar that's put on the table. So the minimum that we have is about $25,000 per year from the Park Service from Grand Teton National Park. If we get Yellowstone to chip in, which they're kind of erratic about it, but if we get them to chip in, we can increase it. And so we fund from $50,000 to basically $80,000 per year, really, depending on how much budget room the Greater Yellowstone or the Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks have. That is doubled by the University of Wyoming. So we fund 10 to 15 $5,000 projects, which is about a perfect amount to support a graduate student for the summer. So they can buy, hot dogs, beer, and feed themselves for the summer and stay at the research station, which is very inexpensive to stay. So since with that and other funding, the University of Wyoming National Park Service Research Center together have funded over $3.5 million for research in Grand Teton, Yellowstone, and the broader Greater Yellowstone area. The people that have received that funding have come from 40 U.S. colleges and universities and 8 international institutions from all over the world. We have some guy coming from Botswana next week. So this is research projects done, many of them not supported by us, some supported by us, but many with their own grants coming in to stay for a week to study Mormon crickets or whatever. The station-based research since 1976 has resulted in over 1,000 scientific publications in the scientific literature. We do everything, as I said, not just biology and geology, but cultural and historic resources. I understand that you've had Mary Humstone come here to survey Spear-O-Wigwam. This is a study that Mary Humstone led her team to do of the historic restoration of the buildings, these historic buildings that we have at the park. So this is very, very useful, and I'll leave this with you. Oh, okay, good. But how we can maintain and keep all of our buildings functioning. It's a research project that led to a publication that we use every day. Social sciences, evaluation of the Be Bear Aware messaging program at Grand Teton. Patricia Taylor from the sociology department at the university has done this project off and on over the years to try to make sure that the park visitors are they being told? Obviously, when we read the newspaper, we learn that not everybody learns because somebody goes up to hug a bear and have their picture taken, do a selfie with a bear or a bison. You hear about it every year in Wyoming, and especially in Grand Teton and Yellowstone. So an important research project that was supported by us and was useful to the park in evaluating and changing their programs to get more information. Physical sciences, Snake River geomorphology, how the river is changing. Carl Legletter, a faculty member in the geography department at UW, has been doing that work off and on for several years. The Teton Fault and earthquake hazards in the physical sciences, especially Bob Smith, who's the expert on the Yellowstone supervolcano from University of Utah, and Glenn Thackeray from Idaho State University studies the Teton Fault. Biological sciences, the plants, everything you can imagine. Experts on aquatic plants, experts on certain sorts of fungi and other things. biological sciences, invertebrates, invasive mud snails, to bees, a number of bee researchers, several different butterfly taxonomy people are there every other year. The vertebrates, of course, there isn't a picture of a bear here, but there are a number of bear studies, grizzly bear, black bear, hibernation studies, moose, elk, wolves, coyotes, every kind of critter you can think of. So as examples of kinds of specific projects just in the last couple of years, climate change and plant pollinator mismatch. As the climate changes, some pollinators, like certain species of butterfly, only go to one species of plant. So if the emergence of that plant in the spring happens earlier and earlier and earlier, and that butterfly doesn't also get earlier and earlier and earlier at the same rate, there could be a mismatch. And this is a big controversial topic in biology all over the world these days with climate change. Exotic invaders like New Zealand mud snail, the impact of fire on streams, the whole fire ecology issue in the greater Yellowstone area, of course, is important. Wolf reintroduction and effects of wolves on coyotes, which affects small mammals. So there are all kinds of ecosystem changes that occur as a consequence of things like the wolf reintroduction. So a lot of different kinds of projects, and this is just an example. A very important thing is our little $5,000 small grants, whether given for 1 year or 2 or 3 years in a row, leverages big money into research needs in the parks. So that leverage is not unimportant. The maybe prominent example of that is Monica Turner, Bill Rami, and Dan Tinker, and Dan Kashian. Dan Tinker is a botany department faculty member in zoology. Bill Rami got his PhD there. Monica Turner, the leader of the group, is from University of Wisconsin. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences and comes to our little station to do her research. But we've provided, and the Park Service has provided, $168,000 over about a 10-year period. And this research team has managed to get $650,000 of NSF funding to study the same thing as a consequence of the initial data that they collected with our funding. So across all of our small grants, we can document that small grants program has brought over almost $2.5 million of federal grants and private funds to the park to study things that are important to the park based on our little bitty grants that help fund a startup on projects. So another example, $20,000 on amphibian distribution has led to $500,000 in outside funding. $16,500 over a 12-year period that we funded to Diane Dubinsky from Iowa State University has led to $900,000 in NSF funding. So really important to basically get seed grants that bring in other money on important issues. And most of these people then continue to stay at a research station. Only they can afford steak instead of hot dogs the next time they come back if they get one of these big grants. So that's all I have. That's the view from the boat dock or from the Barrel Lodge, a sunset, probably with fire, changing the atmosphere so we get these beautiful sunsets at the disadvantage of the people upwind in California and Washington and Oregon that are having fires. So that's all I have.
How do you get the word out to all these different places about all the advantages here?
Well, we have a website. We also have now my secretary is really into Facebook, so I have a Facebook site as well. So when people are searching for places to do research or looking, if it's a researcher from New Jersey and they're looking, or West Virginia, and they're looking for a place to study, say, noise in the park, in natural systems, if they Google those keywords, they'll end up at our website, most likely. But we also have a long list of researchers that have expressed interest any time in the last 20 years, or have submitted a proposal, or have been to the station since 1976. If we have their email address, we send out our call for proposals in November or December to hundreds and hundreds of people. And so, that's a lot of it. Preparing the newsletter and the call for proposals is the tough work, and then it's fairly easy now electronically to send stuff out. We used to also mail it by snail mail, but last year we quit doing that. I don't know, it's too slow, I guess. Yes, ma'am?
Does your website also show the results of the research?
Our annual reports do. And our annual reports are searchable. Our website has a link to the site in the University of Wyoming library system where all of the annual reports back to 1953 are now, they just finished scanning them all in last year. They're all scanned in electronically. So you can search the name of an investigator, or the name of the critter, or the geologic feature, or whatever it was that they researched, and it will electronically search that whole database and pop up the papers or reports that are in our annual report. It takes investigators about a year or year and a half. So the people that are doing research this summer, we won't get their reports till next spring. And then it'll take several months to get them all edited, cleaned up, and put into the annual report. So stuff doesn't appear until about a year after, or a year and a half after the work was done. But if you want to know whether, we have a woman at the research station right now, this month, who was, her mentor was a guy by the name of Herb Levy, who came to the research station while it was still the New York Zoological Society in the late 40s and early 50s, and surveyed spiders all over the greater Yellowstone area. He was a faculty member at Harvard in the Harvard Museum of Natural History. Well, this woman, who's middle-aged now, he was her mentor when she was an undergraduate student, and she is coming back now after 50 years after Dr. Levy surveyed spiders. So many of us might not, I don't kind of like spiders, but yeah, go for it if that's your gig, But it's important to understand how things have changed. So what she's been able to do is extract from our stuff, but also from Dr. Levy's stuff, what we knew 50 years ago, and she's trying to compare at different sites around the greater Yellowstone area. So the historic change in the biology, the geology, the fault system, the Yellowstone, understanding the Yellowstone caldera, these things change, sometimes very, very slowly, but that change is very, very important for managing these kinds of wonderful places. So.
Where do most of your funds and efforts go towards in the research?
There's a basic cost that we have to meet to basically upkeep on the buildings, keep the plumbing working, keep the infrastructure working, make sure that, and so we've made a commitment. We don't pay, the University of Wyoming does not pay the National Park Service to be there and to manage this site. But we've made a commitment that we will keep, all of the buildings will be well maintained. And so that cost us about $80,000 a year just in plumbing, you can, from plumbing, cheap plumbing parts to new roofs once in a while, sometimes very expensive things, and to pay the help that, that does the maintenance work all summer and really all year. We have a half-time university employee that works all summer or half the summer, off and on through the course of the summer, to maintain the logs and the roofs and everything. And he comes in about every 10 days in the wintertime to shovel snow off the roofs so that the places, they don't cave in. So it's expensive to just do that. That money comes from the University of Wyoming, okay? So maintenance and salaries for the employees comes from the University of Wyoming. All the money from the research grants, for the research grants, comes from the National Park Service or the University of Wyoming or the National Science Foundation or other agencies, and donations. We also have had over the years some significant donations that we generally use for special kinds of things that are hard to fund some other way. I gave you a lot of information to a simple question. Okay, lunchtime.